There's a version of faith that's really just a demand dressed up in religious language. And the second temptation in Matthew 4, the one that happens on a rooftop in Jerusalem, is where Jesus comes face to face with exactly that. Not with obvious evil, not with some grotesque offer of power, with Scripture, quoted accurately, applied precisely, and weaponized. That's what makes this one the hardest to talk about, because the temptation here isn't to do something obviously wrong. It's to prove something true. So let's get into the text, Matthew 4, verses 5 through 7. I'm going to read it in two translations because the differences actually matter here. First, the ESV. Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, You shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Now the NRSV, which I want you to hear alongside it. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, Do not put the Lord your God to the test." Roughly the same. And yet, there are some cracks in the English worth prying open. We'll get there. But first, let me tell you what most people hear when they read this passage. The version most people carry of this story is a story about magical thinking. The devil quotes Scripture to tempt Jesus into doing something reckless, and Jesus refuses because he knows better. The lesson: don't test God. Don't be presumptuous. Don't expect God to bail you out of danger you walked into yourself. This reading is often illustrated with something like, don't drive reckless and pray for safety. Don't jump off a cliff and expect the laws of physics to bend for you because you said a prayer first. The passage becomes a corrective against a childish faith that thinks being God's person exempts you from consequences. And that reading isn't wrong. It's just not close to the ground. It doesn't get at why this temptation was a temptation. It doesn't explain what the devil understood about Jesus' situation that made this the right move at the right moment. It treats the passage like a fable with a moral, instead of like a scene with a specific person under a specific kind of pressure. Because here's the thing about that reading. It makes the temptation look stupid. Jump off a building? That's what you're offering? Why would a spiritually serious person even be tempted by that? If you read it and think, well, obviously Jesus wouldn't do that, you've missed the real tension. Because the real temptation isn't about jumping. It's about what jumping would prove. Please do take a moment to leave a comment and hit the like button so that other people may also receive this message. The devil isn't saying, I bet you're dumb enough to fall for a death trap. He's saying, I bet you want certainty badly enough to manufacture it. He's saying, if you're who you think you are, now's the time to find out for sure. And that offer, certainty on demand, proof on command, the resolution of doubt through spectacle, that's not stupid. That's sophisticated. That's something a person under genuine spiritual pressure might actually want. That's the temptation. And that's what most Sunday readings skip right past. So let's look at what's actually happening in the Greek, because Matthew is being very precise here, and the English flattens a lot of it. The scene opens with the phrase, tot paralambane, auton ho diabolos, then the devil took him. That verb, paralambane, is the same verb used in Matthew 1 when Joseph takes Mary as his wife, and later in Matthew 17 when Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to the Mount of Transfiguration. It's a verb of accompaniment, of escorting, of someone going with someone else to a specific place for a specific purpose. Matthew isn't describing an abduction. He's describing a guided tour with an agenda. They end up on what the text calls the Terigion tu hieru, literally the little wing of the temple. Most English translations say Pinnacle, which is fine, but it hides the architectural specificity. Probably refers to the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount, where the royal portico met the Kidron Valley below. The historian Josephus describes this spot. He says that if you stood there and looked down, the depth was so great that it made you dizzy just to look. This was a known place, a specific place. The drop was real, something like 450 feet to the valley floor. So this isn't a symbolic rooftop. This is the highest point in the most sacred complex in Jerusalem, with a 400-foot drop on the other side. The setting itself carries meaning. This is the center of Jewish religious life, and the devil is saying, right here, in front of everyone, now. Then comes the condition, E huios e tu theou, if you are the Son of God. That's the same conditional structure from the first temptation, back in verse 3. And here's something the English blurs. In Greek, this is a first-class conditional. That means it's not expressing doubt. It's not, if you are the Son of God, which we're not sure about. First-class conditionals in Greek assume the condition is true for the sake of the argument. A more accurate rendering might be, since you are the Son of God, or given that you are the Son of God. The devil isn't questioning Jesus' identity. He's leveraging it. He's saying, this is what your identity means. This is what it should be worth. Prove it by using it. And then the scripture quote. This is the moment the passage turns, because the devil doesn't make up a promise. He finds one. Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12. He will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. And this is where I need you to hear the full force of what's happening. Psalm 91 is not a fringe text. It's one of the great psalms of protection and divine faithfulness. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. This psalm was beloved. It was ancient. In Second Temple Jewish tradition, there's evidence it was used in protection rituals, recited over children, whispered as a shield against evil. The rabbis associated it with safety in spiritual combat. Some traditions connect it specifically to the protection of God's anointed, so the devil isn't quoting obscure text. He's quoting the greatest hits. He's quoting something Jesus would have known by heart since childhood. And he's quoting it accurately. The words are right. The reference is real. The promise is genuine. The problem is what he's doing with it. He's cutting it loose from its context. Psalm 91 is a psalm of trust. It describes what happens to the person who makes the Most High their dwelling, who holds fast to God, who loves God. The protection in the psalm isn't a machine that gets triggered by jumping off buildings. It's the fruit of sustained faithfulness, of a relationship of trust already built. The devil is taking the promise and severing it from the relationship that grounds it. He's saying, skip to the payoff. Demand the result without the posture that produces it. And Jesus' answer, the Greek is palin gegraptai. It is also written, or more precisely, again it stands written. The verb gegraptai is a perfect passive, which in Greek describes a past action with ongoing present effects. What was written remains written. Jesus is setting one written thing against another. And what he reaches for is Deuteronomy 6:16. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. In Greek, ekpeirasis, you shall not test. That word peirazo is the same word used at the very start of this passage for what the devil is doing to Jesus. He is testing him, and Jesus' answer names the operation exactly. This is a test, and the command is, don't. Now here's where the thread runs deep, because Deuteronomy 6:16 doesn't just say don't test God in a vacuum. It comes with a specific memory attached. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massa. Massa. You have to go back to Exodus 17 for this. The Israelites are in the wilderness. They're thirsty. There's no water. And they don't say, God, please provide. They say, is the Lord among us or not? They demand proof. They demand a sign. They've already seen the plagues. They've walked through the sea. They've watched the army of Egypt drown behind them. And they're still asking, is God actually here? Moses names the place Massa, which means testing. And the entire tradition surrounding that moment treats it as a kind of foundational failure, not of faith, exactly, but of trust. The difference matters. You can believe all the right things about God and still demand that God perform for you. Still need the sign to confirm what you say you already know. That's what happened at Massa, and that's what the devil is offering Jesus. The wilderness parallel is explicit, and Matthew has been drawing it from the beginning of this chapter. Jesus is in the wilderness for 40 days, echoing Israel's 40 years. He's hungry, as Israel was hungry. He's being tested, as Israel was tested. In the first temptation, he quotes Deuteronomy 8:3. Man shall not live by bread alone. The Deuteronomy passages he's quoting aren't random. They're all from the section of the book where Moses is recounting the wilderness years and drawing lessons from them for the generation about to enter the land. Jesus is replaying the wilderness, but he's not replaying Israel's failures. He's going back through the same tests and getting them right. Where Israel demanded bread, Jesus refused to manufacture it. Where Israel demanded proof of God's presence at Massa, Jesus refuses to manufacture that too. And this is the shape of the whole thing. The second temptation isn't just about presumption. It's about whether the wilderness can be short-circuited, whether trust can be replaced by a demonstration, whether Jesus, whether any person, can get to the certainty they need without going through the silence that produces it. The answer in both testaments is no. The wilderness isn't an obstacle to the relationship. It's where the relationship gets forged. So where does this land now? Not in the abstract. Actually now. What does it look like when a person does what the devil is suggesting? You know what it looks like. It looks like the prayer that's really an ultimatum. The one that starts as petition and quietly turns into, and if you don't come through on this, I'm going to have to reconsider what I believe. It looks like the relationship you're staying in not because you sense it's right, but because you've decided that if God wanted you to leave, God would make it obvious, so you're waiting for the sign. Forcing the issue, staging the test, it looks like the spiritual practice you've turned into a metric. You pray for 30 days, and if nothing changes, the experiment's over. You fast and you wait and you give it a timeline. And the timeline isn't trust. The timeline is a demand with a religious wrapper. It looks like the theological crisis that comes every time a prayer doesn't get answered the way you needed it answered. Because somewhere underneath that crisis is the assumption that an unanswered prayer is data, that it tells you something definitive about whether God is actually there. That's Massa. That's the question, is the Lord among us or not? And the text isn't saying that doubt is sin. Doubt shows up all over this book. The text is naming something more specific, the choice to engineer certainty rather than build trust, to replace the long, slow, ambiguous work of faith with a moment that settles the question once and for all. There's a reason this is so seductive. The wilderness is genuinely disorienting. Jesus has just been baptized, just heard the voice from heaven, just had the whole thing confirmed, and immediately he's out in the desert alone for 40 days with no food and whatever the devil counts as company. That's not comfortable. That's not immediately reassuring. And if you're standing on the pinnacle of the temple and someone says, you can end the uncertainty right now, you can find out if any of this is real, just do the thing and see what happens. That's not a stupid offer. That's a tempting one. The demand for proof almost always comes out of genuine pain. That's what makes Jesus' refusal so significant. He's not refusing from a place of comfort. He's refusing from inside the same uncertainty. He doesn't jump, not because he doesn't want to know, but because he's already chosen a different way of knowing. And that's the question this passage leaves open. Not, are you testing God? That's too easy to answer no to and then go do it anyway under a different name. The harder question is this. What kind of knowing do you actually want? Because there's knowing that comes through spectacle, through the undeniable sign, through the thing that settles the argument forever. And there's knowing that comes through staying in the wilderness long enough for the silence to become something other than absence. The devil's offer is the first kind. Jesus' refusal points toward the second. And the text doesn't tell you the second kind is easy. It doesn't tell you it's faster or more comfortable or that it produces fewer doubts along the way. It just shows you someone who'd been offered the shortcut and chose not to take it. That choice is what the rest of Matthew's gospel is about. And honestly, it might be what your next week is about too. Next week we're finishing the temptation sequence. The third temptation, the kingdoms of the world, and what happens when the thing being offered isn't proof but power.